Good afternoon. Welcome to yet another BW Dialogue. We all need inspirational role models to look up to be able to have somebody that we want to be like and get inspired from a journey that is truly transformational and in some way has built modern India and modern Indian enterprises. One of such individuals and entrepreneurs was Mr. Deshbandhu Gupta, who built Lupin, and in some way Lupin is equal to the Indian pharma industry. And it also showcases the entrepreneurial success of Indian entrepreneurs across the globe. It also showcases Indian pharma's dominance across the world. Today we are going to talk about Mr. Deshbandhu Gupta, and we are going to look at his life, his journey, his success, his impact on India through the eyes of Mr. Manish Sabharwal, who really doesn't need an introduction, but just to put a context, he's an entrepreneur, he's the founder of TeamLease, he also serves on the RBI board, and he's helping the government in policy making, giving his inputs as an entrepreneur and somebody who's deeply interested in the growth of Indian entrepreneurs. He is in some way at the intersection of policy, entrepreneurship and education. So Mr. Sabharwal and his co-author, Mr. Khanna, have written this book on Mr. Deshbandhu Gupta called Made in India, and I read this book a couple of weeks back. It gives you a journey of how Indian pharma industry was born, some of the constraints turned into opportunities. And let me ask Mr. Sabharwal, why this book now and why is this book needed?
See, I think the dismantling of the License Raj, which began in 1991, was a break from the past, but I don't think it was enough. China and India had the same per capita GDP in 1991. Today they are 5 times more than us. And I really attribute this to how policy treated entrepreneurs. After 1956, we murdered entrepreneurship. We nationalized banks, we put SSI reservation, we took over Air India for 2 crores, but we don't, the government should not be running businesses. It paid 2 crores for Air India, but it put 2 lakh crores in the last 10 years of ownership. I mean, even in the G20, nobody wants to stay in an ITDC hotel. Even the government doesn't put its own guests in a Shuka hotel. But the government has a very important role. So I think this book for me was a synthesis of 3 things that I have long been obsessed about. One is, why are countries poor? It's a fundamental question. I landed in August 1994 for my MBA at Wharton. By September, I was asking myself, these Americans are smarter than us. Why are they richer than us? And since then, I've been obsessed with entrepreneurship, with institutions, and recognizing that deregulation or decriminalization or digitization or just regulatory cholesterol being reduced, which is something I've been asking for 20 years, is not asking for an invisible state or no state. It is recognizing that if an invisible state made places hotbeds of entrepreneurship, then Swat Valley in Afghanistan or Waziristan in Pakistan would be hotbeds of venture capital. That's not true. But I think the Indian state was oppressive in this tug of war mentality that for the government to win, entrepreneurs have to lose, rather than a dance mentality. And counterintuitively, pharma is a creation of government policy, right? In 1970, the government passed the Indian Patents Act, and the US government passed the 1984 Hatch-Waxman Act. So I had to eat a little bit of humble pie to recognize that there are policies which can make a huge difference. So it was to reframe the recognition of entrepreneurship, which is DBG, who grew up in a house without electricity or water, had a lifelong limp because he couldn't afford medical care, to reframe companies that can make in India and sell all over the world. You don't have to be Western to be modern. You know, some of us who grew up in the License Raj assumed that dressing Western, I do some of that today, listening to Western music was why you had to be modern. You have to be modern, you don't have to be Western. And Indian pharma particularly, nobody gave it a chance because no economist predicted that a country with 128th in per capita GDP, which is what we are today, would make 60% of the world's medicines. So I think for me, India is an ancient civilization finding its modern voice. Entrepreneurship has been kneecapped or held back in ways that are unnecessary and uncalled for. So if we may be fourth in total GDP, but if we want to raise our ranking in 128th in per capita GDP, we need to renegotiate our relationship with entrepreneurs from policy perspective. And I think this pharma and software are wonderful examples of what can be done when we do that.
I may bring in this aspect. Mr. Gupta was also your father-in-law,
Yes.
right? The world knew him as this humble entrepreneur who created a giant of a company and created the early success for Indian pharma, which led to other people
Yes.
emulating and following his footsteps. As a father-in-law, and you as a son-in-law saw him up close and personal, saw his journey, felt the impact of what he did on his family. Give us a sense of how he was like.
I mean, I think he just changed the size of my thoughts. If I go back and look back at the 17 years that I was lucky enough to know him, he was, I mean, even when in the book I have written, when he had a 1 crore business plan, he went to the IIMs to hire and hired an IIM graduate and said, write me a 1,000 crore business plan. It wasn't a 10 crore business plan, it wasn't a 100 crore business plan, it was a 1,000 crore business plan at 1 crore. And at that point, thinking like that, for me is particularly important because I am a child of liberalization. I graduated from college the year India started opening up, which is 1991. But he grew up in an era where to change his prices, he needed government permission. He parked himself in Delhi for days and he told a government employee, secretary who saw him sitting outside his office for 2 days saying, you have no work or what? He said, I have no work till you approve my prices, sir. I mean, what do you mean you have no work? You approve my prices, I'll go and reduce TB in India. And Lupin is now the world's largest maker of TB medicines. So I think just his ability to sort of recognize that anything big is done through a team. I think that was an important part. He used to, it's an old Rajasthani proverb, you want to go fast, go alone, you want to go far, go together. I think that is a really key important part. But it's not just about teamwork, it is the right portfolio in teamwork, which is thinkers and doers, right? We have a huge amount of contempt among thinkers for doers. They say you don't look at the big picture.
Yeah,
we
have to Gyanchand and Karamchand. We need both.
Yes, no, and you need both in the same company. Thucydides, he was a Greek historian. He used to say any army that has too much of a gap between its thinkers and doers will have its fighting done by fools and its thinking done by cowards. Right? Great entrepreneurs and great companies have the right balance of thinking and doing. Because if you do too much thinking and no doing, you won't do anything. But if you have too much doing and no thinking, you'll do nothing great. I think that right madhyam mark between thinkers and doers is something he did very well. But the most important thing, I think, in today's world that is obviously very hard, or at least I see it less and less, is balancing the next quarter and quarter century. Right? Jonas Salks, he was the inventor of the polio vaccine. He said the only question to ask yourself is, are you being a good ancestor? Now, I see no fiscal conservatives anywhere in the world. I definitely don't see them among chief ministers because everybody is playing a one innings game. You're stealing from your children, you're stealing from your grandchildren. I think that great institutions or great countries are run by people, or we make stewards are people who are not playing a one innings game. They care about what happens after them because they recognize that we all sit under trees that people who planted never had a chance of sitting under. So I think long-term thinking, next quarter, quarter century, balancing thinking and doing, but just thinking so big that knowing that I will not reach my goals, but I will die trying, may be the most important self-fulfilling prophecy. Because when you the biggest danger is not aiming too high and missing, it's aiming too low and getting there. Is what he sort of had a tone from the top, but he valued education. He has 5 children, one went to Harvard, one went to Kellogg, one went to Wharton, and 2 were doctors. So they had an opening balance where they could be spoiled kids, but he was very clear that education is the only renewable energy for a country, but it is also the most important tool that whether you're rich or poor, it is the infrastructure of opportunity and ambition.
What are the qualities that you saw him having, which also built the company? One is, of course, his scale of ambition.
Yes.
And never say never, never say die, handle a crisis like there's no crisis. I mean, recognize it, but handle it. All that comes out in the book. But tell us one or two other qualities that may be relevant for entrepreneurs today.
Well, he believed nobody fails, people just give up early. That was something he said all the time, that nobody fails, people just give up early. So I think the question of persistence, even when you're sort of defying the odds, is really key. I think the main one was, just making investments way in advance of when they are needed. He set up a US FDA plant 10 years before it sent medicines to the US. Now imagine the cost of carrying a US FDA plant on your balance sheet and P&L, but he was always very clear, we are going to compete with the best in the world, and we can send medicines to Russia, we can send medicines to China very easily, but I want to send medicines to America because that is the biggest market and that has the highest standards, and if we send to America, everybody else will let us in. So I think the concept of sort of long-term thinking, thinking in terms of the quarter century as much as the next quarter is sort of very important from his perspective. But the fundamental point of entrepreneurship is recognizing that entrepreneurship is hypothesis testing. You can't prove anything right, you have to prove it wrong, right? When a lot of big corpocrats from big companies, yesterday I got a call from somebody around 30,000-40,000 crore company, and I'm saying, I'm getting bored out of my mind, I would quit my job, but I don't have the perfect idea. And I told him entrepreneurship is not about finding the perfect idea, right? Very few people implement what they started out to implement because it is iterative thinking. And he started in domestic formulations, he quickly pivoted to TB, then he quickly pivoted to something else. So the Lupin of every decade in the 5 decades that he ran it was built on the opening balance in the last decade, but it was a substantially different company. So the willingness to sort of recognize that the only thing constant is change is something we all vocalize, but we don't always show it up in our investments, show it up in changing people. Sometimes the people who bring you from ground floor to 3rd floor won't take you to 10th floor. So I think his willingness to sort of recognize that change is constant and building is a river, not a pond. When you have to constantly change. So, but the first 3 words of the book consciously are Vir Bhogiva Sundara, which is the brave shall inherit the earth. Courage is this underrated virtue. And it's hard to teach courage. In fact, I would say courage is probably the most valuable virtue because it's the hardest to fake. I know a lot of people who fake curiosity, who fake kindness, who fake empathy, but courage is hard to fake, right? And so I think the biggest thing that we have to learn from these entrepreneurs, whether it was Anji Reddy or Dilip Sanghvi or Yusuf Hamid or TBG, is that being brave, which is taking risks much before anybody else does, looking ahead. Schopenhauer was a Greek philosopher, he used to say, talent hits a target that no one else can hit, but genius hits a target that no one else can see, right? And these people created a pharmaceutical industry, which I remember reports and debates from the World Bank many decades ago that India should not focus on software and pharma. These are things which rich countries should do. You should focus on textile manufacturing and shoe manufacturing and things. Don't waste your time on this. So I think these entrepreneurs have defied odds. If we had listened to the World Bank, then we wouldn't be exporting $350 billion today, and imagine where the rupee would be.
On that note, we cannot complete any conversation about entrepreneurship or progress or transformation without talking about the role of AI in our lives, in how businesses will be run, and the impact on businesses. What do you think is going to happen in the next few years, based on what is happening? There is already a lot of tasks that are being replaced by AI in consulting, in legal services, in software coding, in a lot of support functions. AI has really created loss of jobs, or at least eliminated in some cases, totally forever. Where are we headed? Are IT and ITES companies going to survive and thrive, or as Mr. Vinod Khosla says, by 2030 they will be much more diminished?
See, I think pessimists will always get more respect than optimists, because pessimists sound like they're protecting you, while optimists sound like we're selling you something. With that caveat, I don't believe that AI is like COVID or like cancer for the labor market, because we are better at predicting which jobs will be destroyed, and many jobs will be destroyed, but we're very bad at predicting which jobs will be created, because one is a counterfactual and the other is this thing. When e-commerce happened in India, what was a very important industry in the creation of TeamLease 25 years ago? Organized retail, Shoppers Stop, Trend. We were giving them people on the shop floor. When e-commerce came, obviously a lot of hiring in stores came down, but nobody predicted that there would be much more hiring in warehousing and in delivery. Right? Even we didn't predict that actually there are more jobs in warehousing and delivery than the ones that were lost in retail, and actually they are lower skill jobs, so it's better for the labor force. Usme AC mein to you had to be a graduate, you had to have, shave every day, you had to cut your nails, you had to tuck your shirt in, you had to have chosen your parents and pin code wisely. in these jobs now, instead of security being the first port of landing from somebody from Balasore or now when they come to Delhi, now delivery and warehouse jobs, which are better than security jobs in some sense. So I would submit that the India software employment will go from 5 million to 10 million. Vinod Khosla is wrong. Code writing is only one part of the skill of Indian software industry. Code writing may become less labor intensive, but what you do before you write the code and what you do after you write the code is really important. And so I would submit that we don't know whether AI will bring less skilled people to the median or it will make superstars uncatchable. That's a fundamental. If it makes less skilled people to the median, it will be a gift to humanity, right? If it makes superstars uncatchable, maybe it will do both. So I think let's be humble enough to recognize that when every technology comes, it is very hard for us to model the net impact of it. I think for a developing country like India, which is very far from the productivity frontier, yes, I think if you're at $80,000 like the US is or Switzerland are, then AI could be a labor market shrinkage. But if you're at $2,500, then I think it's not going to stop us to get to $12,000 or $15,000. Now, will India ever be 80,000 per capita income? I don't know, at least not in my lifetime. But I think I am upset that India is not at China's per capita income of $12,500 or Bangalore's per capita income of $12,500. If everybody in India lived in Bangalore, India's GDP would be more than China. So I think AI is not like cancer or COVID. I think AI is a labor market disruption. There will be jobs which will be destroyed. But I think they are already the contours of which jobs will be created. Data massaging, data handling, data cleanup. There are lots of jobs which AI is going to improve the productivity. And if you compare what is the nightmare of the US? That 45% of their labor force will generate 14% of their GDP. Hamara kya bigaad loge? We are already there, no? Unfortunately, the most embarrassing number about India is 45% of our labor force in agriculture only generates 14%.
Farm jobs.
Farm jobs only generate 14% of GDP.
Let me ask you at this stage, since you talked about COVID, 4 days back our Prime Minister talked about the impact of the West Asia crisis.
Yes.
That we may see, and hence he asked us to tighten our belts. 2 days back, Mr. Kotak also kind of in some different words echoed the same sentiment. What do you have to say about the impact of West Asia on Indian companies and Indian entrepreneurs, and how should we brace for it?
Well, like AI, it is unmodelable. See, in theory, there is a distinction between risk and uncertainty. Risk is where you can plot the probabilities. But uncertainty is unmodelable. What is Trump going to say? What is he going to do? How is Iran going to react? I mean, if you decide that economics don't matter, and I think that was one of the flaws in the 70s, 80s, that people thought that economic trumps identity, economic trumps religion, and lately there's no reason for Russia to attack Ukraine other than identity and some kind of national pride. There is no reason for Iran to be resisting at this point other than they are They are ideologues, and America doesn't understand zealots, or economists don't understand zealots, because we think economists think that, everything is economic. So I think that it's unmodelable for India right now. We are a country with a birth defect, with just 1.4 billion people without our own energy. And so much of our energy is imported. There are some long-term solutions which the government has been working on, renewable energy and stuff like that. But obviously Bombay High and Assam did not solve our oil problem, and it at peak was also such a microscopic percentage.
So why can't, there are a lot of things we can learn from China, but one of the things is Chinese have gone everywhere in the world, either built relationships which help their energy sector, or has invested in oil fields across the world to be able to in some way have access to cheaper energy. What can we learn from
But
China?
they're not getting access to cheaper energy, they're just getting access to energy, because oil is a global price. But of course, I think...
So why can't Indian government back Indian entrepreneurs to go abroad and invest in energy?
It could, but I'm not sure energy is like AI or is that form of technology, right? So obviously China's economy is 5 times our size. Shama Shobhati us bhujang ko jiske paas garal ho, right? Yeah. Only the strong can be kind, powerful and benevolent. Even the US trade negotiation, why has China had a little better time than India? Why is Trump in visiting Xi and not visiting us in Delhi? And I think it is because they have made themselves stronger. See, with the US trade negotiation, every time there was a different negotiation, every time they kept saying, but China managed to get away. So I think the only lesson for us from the West Asia crisis, from the AI, why did DeepSeek come out of China rather than come out of India? Why did China become, and that's a criticism everybody has of the pharma industry, how did China become 1/3 of new drugs in the world last year while India has a better drug industry? So I think we have to just make ourselves stronger. We have to make our universities better. We have to reduce regulatory cholesterol. We have to improve infrastructure. We have to have stronger banks. So there's a whole laundry list which everybody knows what can be done, but we have to get it done now and recognize that the puja of 1991, it was a very important intervention, but it was incomplete. We are not ready yet, and we don't have the fertile habitat for 12 trillion economy which China has today, or 15 trillion.
Now, since you bring all this into play, in some way, you've seen Indian entrepreneurs over the last 3 decades, 2.5 decades. You've been an entrepreneur. Has something changed about Indian entrepreneurs in the last decade?
Oh, the shape and size of their thoughts. I think their ambition is much higher. They basically have decided that you don't have to be Western to be modern, right? Multinationals are getting their butt kicked in pharma. In 1970,
in FMCG.
Well, in 1970, there were 10 on the top 10 pharma companies. There was only one Indian company. Today, there is only one foreign company. So 9 of them are Indian companies in the top 10. In FMCG, Indian companies are growing faster. In banking, Indian companies are growing. In cars, Indian companies are growing faster. So I think there is a realization. But of course, in digital payments, PhonePe is India is 43% of the world's global payments. And PhonePe is half of that, one single company, right? So I would say that there are many examples of when Indian entrepreneurs removed their mental chains. Imagine what they could have done if the regulatory cholesterol was reduced, right? India is still a difficult place to do business. It's getting better every day. I think the Jan Vishwas helps, the Deregulation Commission helps, the decriminalization helps. But there is a fundamental philosophy of drunk driving as an argument against cars. You write the law for the chore. There is a fundamental alignment of who allowed you to do this. I mean, you don't need permission for everything. There's a fundamental argument of recognizing that innovation is by definition permissionless. So I think till we change that mindset, and I always hesitate to equate civil service reform with ease of doing business, because that's too big a problem. And I'm not talking about 6,700 ISOs, I'm talking about the 32 million civil servants in India. That is something that steel frame has become a steel cage, and it is holding us back. So Cricket has become more competitive because of IPL. Ranji Trophy never delivered the kind of talent that IPL delivers. I think OTT and streaming platforms deliver better talent than Hollywood used to deliver because it's more meritocratic. I think business, new companies with private equity and venture. My dad was in the police. I could have never started my company unless two venture capitalists backed my business plans because I didn't have any money of my own. And I think so. Business is more meritocratic. Cricket is more meritocratic. Why isn't the civil service more meritocratic? It's very meritocratic in selection. The UPSC exam is probably the toughest exam in the world. But after that, they treat Gadha Ghoda equally in the civil services. And the Ghoda is getting frustrated and the Gadha is celebrating, right? So I think civil service reform is related partly, and it's 32 million civil servants, to why India's per capita GDP. And government spending is not going to solve this problem. Government spending has gone up 110 times since 1990. It's now 115 lakh crores, it used to be 80,000 crores. But per capita GDP has only gone up 8 times. So I think framing India's challenge as raising our per capita GDP points us directly to raising the productivity of our cities, raising the productivity of our companies, and raising the productivity of individuals, which is skill development and education. So I think if we all of us pray to that one God of productivity, then our per capita GDP will be higher than China, because I think Indians have no cultural handicap.
Absolutely. Since you talk about skilling, you talk about education. In the last 15 years, we've tried to have a skilling impact and really upgrade them, if I had to use the word. Have we succeeded? Or we got a long
I think
way
in K-12 education we have made huge progress, and I've always gone back and forth about which is more important: repair, prepare, or upgrade, right? Because repair is few months and it's at the exit gate of the school system. Prepare is the college system and the school system. I think K-12 education in India has gotten much better than it used to be. I used to boycott the launch of the Asar reports, the annual survey on education, because it was so depressing. But last year I went to launch the report because they have more kids in school with better learning outcomes, with more years of schooling than we have ever had before. In K-12 education, the fundamentals of the 3 R's of reading, writing and arithmetic, if you add the 4th R of relationships, may be very important. So I think the embarrassing part of India is that most of this has come from private schools. See, there is no country in the world of India's ambition and capabilities that has only 45% of kids left in government schools. Japan only has 5% of kids in government school. America only has 50%. So if anything should be free and at quality, it should be government schools, right? So my sense is fix government schools and give private sector the space which has been given.
How do you fix government schools?
Oh, fear of falling and hope of rising. We need to punish the bad performers and reward the good performers. We need to decentralize power to principals. You can't run India from Delhi, forget about running it from state capitals. So governance and performance management would be the 2 ways to fix government schools.
Now let me ask you, talk about the positives in K-12, but if you go to engineering institutions, today employability is a big issue, continues to be a big issue. And then employability and scalability go hand in hand. What do you have?
Well, 1/3 of engineering seats are empty for that reason, right? So I think you have to decide whether quantity leads to quality or quality. I think medical education in India has been a shame because we only have 1.5 lakh doctors, which is why it's 2 crores capitation fees. While there is no premium left for engineering education, and engineering schools and colleges are competing on quality, right? The Bangalore ones, which weren't perfect many years ago, competed to be the people supply chain for Wipro, Infosys, TCS, IBM.
And in some way they help build the ITS companies.
So I think that my view is that regulatory cholesterol has held back Indian education. The Purna Swaraj which universities in India deserve has not been given, and we must learn from China. Tsinghua University was destroyed by Mao as recently as 1978. Today it has 84,000 students and 24,000 PhDs. I'm one of the co-founders of Ashoka. We are happy with 4,000 students. We're still going to get to much larger numbers, but we keep reminding ourselves that the scale of China's impact in universities and education systems which is why they are now world leaders in EVs, which is why they are world leaders in solar, which is why they are users in new drug discovery, which is why DeepSeek came out of China and then India.
And also, if you look at Nature's top 10 universities on research, there are more Chinese universities than American now.
Well, that is because we have a regulatory system for universities which treats universities as companies, which treats them as so the regulatory cholesterol in higher education. We need Purna Swaraj for our universities if we want to compete in science and technology.
Now, let me shift gears and ask you about the dole economy, the socialist model. The way we are going down, it looks like it's not helping our country, and there is competition to outdo each other between the CMs and the states, and it seems to be winning them elections, so there is no looking back.
Yes, but we are going to hit the natural gravity or limits of public debt to GDP. On a national basis, it says 80-85%. Many states, Punjab will be defaulting on salaries in a few months because its RBI overdraft is done, everything is done. So I think there are some natural limits. We have to thank the constitution that puts the cap on state government borrowing. Some of them are fudging now, we're putting it in off balance sheet and all that, but CAG is now tightening up on all that also. So my sense is that yes, a modern state is a welfare state, we must acknowledge that, but it should be financed by taxes rather than debt. By being debt, we are not being good ancestors. So I think that the welfareism has run its course.
So you feel at some stage soon?
It's very quickly we have hit the natural limits of it, so maybe we had to do this in a democracy and experiment with it, but India's rupee being weaker, India's interest rates not coming down, are all worries on the sustainability of public debt, are worries about the fiscal models of governments. And the central government has been quite a fiscal conservative in a world where there are no fiscal conservatives left, right? But state governments have been fiscally irresponsible in my mind, and I think we are reaching the limits of that.
I hope so, and I hope so there is better sense that prevails. But now let me ask you another question which in some way comes across in the book, Made in India, is about succession planning. How are we doing as a business world, as India Inc. on succession planning? Are we doing well? Are we not doing well?
I mean, see, succession is at three levels, right? We, as entrepreneurs, as an entrepreneur, I have three roles at TeamLease. I have a shareholder role, a board member role, and a chief executive role. Actually, we traditionally assumed that all were concurrent, all were guaranteed, and all were for lifetime. But in my mind, whose father was in the police, I knew that my chief executive role has nothing to do with my board member role, which has nothing to do with my shareholder role. And in fact, I stepped down from TeamLease because I recognized that Suparna, who used to run Titan, went to IIM, worked at Levers, is a better chief executive than I am because she understands scale, she understands engineering in a way that I don't. So my sense is that I think all models exist. Pharma is a classic example of where DBG handed over to two of his children, and they have done a much better job. The market cap has exploded since Vinita and Nilesh took over Lupin. And DBG acknowledged that, right? He handed over to them in 2013, and the market cap has exploded since then. So my sense is that we are getting much more sophisticated in our notions of succession. The shareholder role can continue. FMCG is a classic example where Varun Berry came from Pepsi, or Dugal came to Dabur, or Saugata came to Marico, or Puri came to Pidilite, and the market cap exploded because these were technicians, let's call them plumbers, who had spent decades in a multinational, understanding how to run a large operation efficiently.
Mr. Sitapati came to Godrej. Within one day, the market cap shot up.
Yes. So I think a partnership between professionals and entrepreneurs. Some entrepreneurs will choose to be very good chief executives. I just concluded out of self-awareness, and I think self-awareness is a superpower, is that I would be a better chairman or a better board member than a chief executive. I'm sure there are many people who are. I think Vinita and Nilesh make great chief executives at Lupin. It just wasn't something for me. So I think that let's just say we're getting more sophisticated about succession, And in some cases, you'd rather be rich than be king. In some places, you might want to be king. That's up to you. But I know many situations where finally the partition in our mind between shareholder, board member, and chief executive, and I think that's very good for India. And that's a little bit of what happened in the IPL. Versus the Ranji Trophy, while in the Ranji Trophy never became the meritocracy that IPL has become. So I think Indian business, by thinking, I mean, you don't choose the Olympic team of 2040 by the children of the team of 2000, right? And so sports is always a brutally meritocratic game in the IPL, but it wasn't in the Ranji Trophy. Just like the license Raj wasn't. The license Raj was, you didn't have clients, you had hostages. People who had money had an unfair advantage over people who didn't. And that's why DBG's story for me was attractive, because he didn't have connections or capital, which were the only two currencies in the licensed Raj.
Brilliant. Now, since you talk about all these aspects, I'm thinking about the role of government. I'm thinking about what the government is doing currently to be able to build a 5 trillion economy, to build a a Viksit Bharat in 2047. And one thing that stands out, and there are many things that stand out, is the fact that like sectors in space, in drones, in quantum, I mean, we need to lead in deep tech. The government is not just become an investor, it has also become a market maker, a consumer.
Yes.
So as to develop the sector. What do you have to say about this change that has happened in the last 5-6 years?
Well, it is the only way we will create critical mass. I mean, Stanford, there's a wonderful book about Stanford called Cold War University. So MIT was created by World War II, Stanford was created by the Cold War. But Silicon Valley was created by government procurement. It was government procurement of technology.
Even now, the AI companies, the chip companies
are all really suppliers to the government. So I think the government using its purchasing power to encourage entrepreneurship. The question is, how do you avoid corruption? How do you do transparent meritocratic procurement rather than crony capitalism? It's been a challenge to do PPPs at scale in India, right? You can do PPPs in a popcorn stand honestly, you can do them dishonestly at scale, but honestly at scale has been a challenge. So I think state capacity has to be raised for us to be able to do procurement, but I think in defense it's relatively easier to do, and we have begun doing that. So I think that this was a long overdue change in the government recognizing that it should not be biased towards foreigners, right? The default is, well, drones aren't made in India, so let's just buy drones from the foreigners, or cell phones aren't made in India, so let's not encourage local manufacturing. But there's a wonderful book called Apple in China, which essentially credits Apple with training 28 million people and teaching China manufacturing. I mean, Tesla and Apple, Tesla taught the EV industry and China taught that. So I think we must use our domestic market, which is quite large, and the procurement policy of government to encourage a technology transfer and encourage innovation adoption. So I think we cannot be comparing ourselves to small countries which are much richer. Singapore, Finland, Norway have much to teach us, but our only real rival is China.
So, this book is about pharma industry. It's also about manufacturing in India, made in India.
Yes.
Have we missed the bus, and are we likely to catch it soon enough?
Oh, I think we have missed the bus, but that doesn't mean there's not another bus coming. I think China has made a list of, I admire China for what it did under Deng Xiaoping, moved 300 million people from farm to non-farm employment. But I'm not sure Xi Jinping is doing the right things for China. In fact, I think he's made a list of everything Deng Xiaoping did right and is crossing it out, right? Property is a real problem, public debt is a problem, his treatment of entrepreneurs is a problem, his treatment of foreign companies is a problem. Deng Xiaoping used to say, I don't care if a cat is black or white if it catches mice. Some people will get rich before others. When you open the window, some flies will get in, but don't worry about them. Hide your strength, bide your time. He was a very wise man. I mean, if any person has moved 400 million people from farm to non-farm and from poverty to non-poverty, it was Deng Xiaoping. So I think this is India's turn to think about manufacturing differently. Now, we won't get to 45, 33, 28, which is the peak of other countries' labor force in manufacturing, but 11% is the long number. So I think that And manufacturing synthesizes all the regulatory cholesterol across land, across labor, across finance, across just the daily life. So we need to shift from the bird's eye view of the daily life of entrepreneurs to the worm's eye view, right? Because the bird's eye view, maybe then you'll talk about fiscal policy, then you'll talk about monetary policy.
It's about execution.
And it is the daily, कितने फॉर्म भरने हैं भाई, कितने इंस्पेक्टर आएंगे, कितने criminal provisions हैं. I mean, it is the daily life of entrepreneurs that is really made difficult by people who don't understand how businesses scale. Yes, there are some chore in the private sector, put them in jail. But don't treat 99% of entrepreneurs as thieves, because they aren't.
And Manish, my last question about the book, and where we are headed. We live in an era of narratives. As an entrepreneur, a company, you get a narrative right,
Yes.
you get somewhere. As a country, you get your narrative right, you get somewhere. As a political party or political leader, you get your narrative. How are we doing as a country? Because you've studied abroad, you travel, you have investors, you have customers. How are we doing as a country in terms of narrative about India?
I mean, there are two types of narratives. One is the absolute view and one is the relative view, right? The relative view is the beauty contest view. You don't have to be Aishwarya Rai or Milind Soman, you just have to be less ugly than your competitors. On a relative basis, India is the only place in the planet for the next quarter, right? 15% of Japan will die in the next 8 years. Europe only has 7% of the world's population but has 50% of the world's social spending. I think America has a problem. Only 7% of the world's population and 50% of the world's defense spending. So I think India has a young population which is poor today, and nothing is holding us back other than ourselves, right? And we're a large country. I think smaller countries have problems in a world of geopolitics which doesn't count countries but weighs them. You know, Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew used to talk as an equal to Margaret Thatcher and all that, and that's not going to happen today. The world of geopolitics is weak. So I think for India right now, it is our turn, it is our chance. We don't have to blame the world. We can take responsibility for adding mass prosperity to mass democracy. I think sometimes, all of us, undervalue the creation of mass democracy. It's a very, very hard thing to do. India has done that successfully. Pakistan didn't have a constitution till 1972. Not a single prime minister in Pakistan has completed their full term, and both countries were born on the same night, and both like biryani and same food and almost have the same language. So I think India's chances are much better than they have ever been in the past on a relative basis. On an absolute basis, we have to recognize that 1991 was incomplete. We did not make life, the daily life, the worm's eye view of entrepreneurs better. We did not fix primary education. We did not give universities Purna Swaraj, and we hadn't built the infrastructure. I think of all the ones I listed, infrastructure is now being taken off the table if you exclude cities. You know, city infrastructure, I live in Bangalore, the average taxi travels at 8 kilometers an hour, most people can walk that fast. So essentially, the problem in cities now is bad urbanization, not urbanization. So I think if we fix good urbanization, if we formalize India, if we industrialize India, which is the farm to non-farm transition, and we fix our human capital, I think India at 100, we would have added mass prosperity to mass democracy.
Fantastic. My last personal question. You've done so much. You've built a company which is, hopefully its best is yet to come. We are on the boards of venerable institutions that are part of policy making, whether it's the RBI or now the CAG. You're on other venerable boards. You've written a book. Do you have a bucket list? What do you want to focus for the next 5-7 years?
I mean, I think that, you know, that is a very, very hard question, because as you move, sort of get to my age, you know, Eliud Kipchoge, who was the first marathoner to have run a marathon in less than 2 hours, said you run the first half of the marathon on your legs and the second half on your mind, right? So I'm clearly reaching that point in my life where I won't be able to compete on my legs with a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old, but I will be able to compete on my mind. And so for me, the ambition would just be that I was born on the 10th floor, right? TeamLease, if anything it has taught me, is that the two most important decisions a child in India makes are to choose your parents wisely and your PIN code wisely. But this is not a problem like cancer or climate change. This is a plumbing problem. We can fix our skill system, we can fix our company creation, we can fix the regulatory cholesterol. So hopefully I can fight the battle for ideas and just add mass prosperity to mass democracy. We missed our tryst with destiny, not because of the world, but because of choices we made. The 1955 Avadi resolution was a horrible document. The second 5-year plan of 1956 was an absolutely poisonous document for entrepreneurship. So if we can make the case, our generation, that we have to renegotiate the relationship of policy and entrepreneurs, I think India will be absolutely the place in the world by India at 2047.
Thank you, Mr. Sabharwal,
Thank
for
you.
talking to us. Enjoyed listening to your thoughts, and I hope people see the qualities that DBG stood for. I've enjoyed reading the book. I'm sure you will enjoy reading the book, Made in India by Manish Sabharwal and Mr. Khanna. And hopefully you'll enjoy what he said and have some takeaways for you as entrepreneurs, and for policy makers that are watching. You got to be part of the solution and not the problem. Wish you luck. Wish us luck as citizens of this great country. We're clearly progressing, but we'll need to get our act together, because there are other countries which are catching up on. They may not have the strengths that we have. Look at where is Vietnam. Look at the KPO, BPO sector. Look at manufacturing. I mean, Bangladesh took away all the textile manufacturing from us. So we can't be complacent on our successes in the public digital infrastructure space or what we've done in the pharma space. We got to be focused on really strengthening what we have and creating giants for the future. So on that note, thank you once again for talking to Business World, and hope to do many more conversations.
Absolutely. Look forward to that.